As someone who leads a community, you are not the hero, you're the guide. So when you think about music, and I think about music, we can both, because we're both technicians, we can have a very geeky conversation about dotted eighth note feels, right? Or whatever it is. Like something that most people are like, what the That's an inside baseball conversation that we can have because we've done hours of practice and thousands of gigs. When you're selling live music to somebody, you're not talking about that stuff. How do you leverage your position in a community of car enthusiasts to help build your music business? What sort of results did I see from self-publishing my book, Narrow Podcasting? And how do you work out if your amazing idea for your next business is worth the effort? Welcome to Not Another Business Podcast with me, Toby Goodman. Gary Mullins is a fellow musician. I've done a few gigs with him over the years and always knew he had a passion for exotic cars and was involved in business. But it took a very long day in a studio together with lots of waiting around between takes to learn a bit more. I know you as a musician, as an entrepreneur. If I'd never met you before and I'd bumped into you in the pub and asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
My response would be that I run a collection of brands that are designed to provide discerning clients with fun, unique, and different experiences that ultimately enhance their events far beyond a standard outfit might do. I'm not really interested in doing anything especially familiar. I much prefer to try and create a space that I can almost, as far as possible, be close to the only thing that's available. I want to create a product where it's hard to compare it to very many other things.
And these bands, for clarity, are playing cover music. They're playing well-known songs, maybe in slightly different styles or what have you, but this is an events business, basically.
It's fundamentally an events business, yeah. I've got a few questions here. I've been reading your book, Narrow Podcasting. There she is. First of all, I have to say, it is absolutely brilliant. Well, I'm not blowing smoke, but this is one of the most actionable books I've ever read.
Thank you.
And it could just be because I'm new to the premise of podcasting and I've not read anything else like it. But the number of things that I've pulled out of it so far, and to be fair, I'm only halfway through. I've got so many bookmarks for places to go that you've highlighted in here, and websites, other books to read, and techniques. It's really refreshing as a book to read. So first of all, thank you for that. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And it's helped me get to a stage where it's really challenging my idea of what starting a podcast might be. I've got a few ideas of things that I want to do, and I'm aware that I need to focus on one thing really to maximize what it is that I'm trying to do. And so I've got a few questions about how you've approached your podcast career and various other elements of your career. And I'm really keen to learn more about what you've done. I think you're fascinating. Just starting from the book in particular, the fact that you have a book, I'm curious to know how valuable it is in validating your position of authority in the niche that you are targeting in your own business, and what recommendations you would have for would-be podcasters with regard to writing a book. I guess the question really comes down to, does having an asset like your book, doesn't necessarily have to be a book, but does an asset like that give you a head start that's worth delaying the start of a podcast for? Like, by writing a book, you're creating that authority, aren't you, in your space? When considering the question, I've realized that I can use the podcast as a way of writing the book. So I see value there.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know your thoughts on all of that.
I had a version of this conversation with Kim Medina on this podcast, so you can listen back to that as well, because she asked the same sort of question and she was in a similar position, different business, considering starting a podcast to serve the business. And there's a couple of contextual things that are worth noting. The biggest one is I wrote the book in 2022 before AI and GPT and all of that stuff happened. And I'm really grateful I did that because it's actually written by me. And a lot of people are putting books out now that are AI slop versions of whatever. That said, I'm a massive fan of repurposing and using stuff that you've recorded to create more things.
Mm.
And because AI is so good now, you can do that in like warp speed compared to what happened when I was writing it during COVID, right? I'll tell you exactly how I wrote my book. First of all, I was making podcasts for myself for a long time, for businesses, and then people started to hire me to help them make their podcast for their business. So that was already happening. And I felt like I had stumbled upon enough of a process, enough of a framework, or even a system that I wanted to document it. And I wanted to document that in the form of a book because something about a book with the clunk value of having an asset with a date on it means if you're the person that wrote the book about the thing and it was published, then I'm one of the first, if not the first person to write a book about growing a business using a podcast rather than growing a podcast. So I saw that as an opportunity and I wanted to get in early. The results of that, it's given me instant credibility, authority, all of that stuff. I hired a company to help me polish it. It's edited, you've probably noticed, in American English, not British English, because 99.9% of my business and work that isn't music is through the US. So made that decision. I worked with a ghost writer who pulled some ideas out of me and helped me polish it, which was great because I really believe in you can't see the label from a bottle stuff. So all of that cost money, but I 100% wrote that book. So I had a community of people who knew me as the podcast guy in the community I was in. And I just told them that I was ready to share my framework and I was going to tell them everything I knew about how to use a podcast to grow a business. And if they wanted to show up, I think it was on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It was during COVID, so everyone was at home. That was the other part. I was going to tell them everything I knew over 3 sessions. And I'd planned out the chapters of that book, start here, finish here. I did about an hour of talking. I stopped a lot to ask what questions they had and to ask them what they found most useful because that helps.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I wanted to know what I'd missed. So then I opened it up for Q&A. And the price of that was their time. And they paid me, I think, something like $2,000 each to do that.
Wow.
I think there were 7 of them. So that was a significant chunk of money that basically paid for the publishing, the editing. So it wasn't a podcast, but I was using those conversations to help me map out my book. Oh, and then I created a course out of it as well, which is now my Profitable Pod Method skills sessions and can still sell for $2,000 for like video lessons of all of that. That whole thing probably cost me about 45,000 US dollars. But because I wrote it and I put it out and I hired good people and it got to the top of the charts on Amazon because they had loads of machinery to do that, that got me instant recognition in the industry. And that got me on stages in LA, in Vegas, and in London. And in fact, this week I'm doing my 3rd podcast show, London, which is now the biggest podcast show in the world. That speaking gig doesn't pay, but it gives me massive credibility. I've spoken all over the world on this subject. I'm quite a nervous speaker. I don't really like it very much. I much prefer this kind of thing. But it gives me that instant credibility so that when clients who are making a serious investment in me look at who I am and what I've done, I would wager my best clients don't read my book, but I think they go, oh, cool, he's written the book on it. Now, what's he going to say about where I am now? Because I haven't got time for this shit. So that's how it's helped me. And it's definitely paid for itself many times over. And I think it will continue to do so, despite the fact that I've learned so much more in the intervening years.
Yeah, that's super useful. Are there any other things that you would change in the book off the top of your head?
I'd put more about the workflows that I've created for different clients, because when I wrote that book, I was working mainly for solo consultants, executive coaches, those kinds of people mainly who were probably doing 250 to 750, maybe $1 million a year as thank you very much paid consultants. Most of them were corporate refugees out of big high pressure jobs in New York or Boston or wherever. So that book was really written with those people in mind. But since then, I've worked with much larger organizations with $80 million a year multi-state healthcare organizations. And I've applied different methods through the lens of people with a massive team, like hundreds of people. So you can do more when you've got a bigger business with different segments, right? You've got different locations, you've got different skill sets within your team. You're offering more than one product, whereas a lot of the people I was working with were offering coaching. I talk about bigger business because I've now got the credibility to do that, and I didn't have before. I talk about AI and the prompts that I've found useful, and that changes on a daily basis. So the one thing I will say to you is I found, as a muso to muso, I would say to you, I found it incredibly uncomfortable to talk about the fact I'd written a book, and I completely siloed who I was as a guy that does business away from the decades of experience I've got as a muso in the trenches, right? Because I felt that most musicians would think I'd let the side down. The self-talk around how I show up as a musician is brutal when I know I've been basically making money in business doing something else. And what I've learned over the years is that's my problem and I have to get over it. And also, I'm meeting more people like you, Gary, and I'm meeting more people like Kira, who's also on this podcast. She's got a business, education-based business, teaching women how to play drums in a group environment. I think we basically both grew up where we had a preconception of what being a successful musician was. And you can talk to the people that we put on pedestals and they'll all tell you that industry and those careers don't really exist anymore. Yeah, a little bit self-helpy on my part, but also hopefully that gives you some context. The reason why I quite like doing a podcast this way is because you can hear me talk about it, and it's not just copy on a page. You can hear the tone and you can hear the questions I'm asking myself all the time. And I hope that's useful to you and to anyone that might be listening.
Yeah, just to follow up on that premise, I have similar mental challenges to work out how I promote and present myself in different arenas. I'm quite, as you alluded to with the car thing, I'm quite busy in the exotic car space, and it's an area I'd like to explore. Also, it's quite important that I promote myself with credibility in the music space. How do you go about straddling those hats, wearing different hats and promoting them equally? Can you do it?
You and me were on a gig together like a couple of weeks ago, and I got a phone call from somebody who I thought, because I played you the voicemail because he was funny, somebody who is probably the person who I love playing with the most. And I've realized over the years that he doesn't care what else I'm doing. And in fact, he supports what else I'm doing because I've spoken to him about it. And because he happens to be an American, he knows of some of the more prominent figures I've worked with in the US government, former administrators and stuff. And he's cool with it. And if he's still calling me for gigs, it doesn't really matter. So actually, I care less. This is why I asked you the question at the beginning. How do you talk about yourself when you bump into some random in the bar? And the answer is, tell me more about the person I've bumped into. It has to be that. And some of that is, you don't even have to speak to them before you can decide how you might pitch yourself. Because if someone has driven to a nice country pub and they've pulled up in a Ferrari and you end up standing next to them at the bar, you're probably not going to start talking about music to them because you've got other things that you can talk about and connect with. So the environment is really so crucial. One of the things that Julian treasures, and I talk about him all the time, and I will continue to talk about him because he's incredible. One of his TED Talks talks about there's a noise of a building site or something that he puts on quickly and he speaks over it. And he says something along the lines of, you wouldn't ask someone to marry you underneath a building site or a busy train track or whatever. So it's who you're talking to, where you are physically, location wise, and where they are in their headspace. And I think if you're actually in person with someone, you can read that
Mm.
much better than you can if you're writing a page of copy for a landing page on a website. The biggest thing is tell me all of the other elements at play. But when it comes to online stuff, there will be an episode that comes out next week. So certainly by the time this goes out, with my friend Dana Steele. And Dana is a Texan who was a rock and roll DJ. She married a NASA pilot and she was the first person to set up the NASA online store.
Oh, wow.
So there's two things. So she's a rock and roll radio DJ. She's an entrepreneur who moved NASA's merch online. It's no small thing. She's written 17 books. One of them is about how she coped during her mother's decline during Alzheimer's. And she's written a play about that. And she's run for Congress twice in Houston, right? So she is the most deeply expert person at a number of things, none of which are related to each other. No one's stopping her. No one's going to say, you can only focus on one thing. Like,
Mhm.
it's cool. She's got a really interesting life. She does loads of cool things. The thing that I realized, and I know this about her because she's helped me a lot, she's been a client and she's also helped me a lot, is that she does definitely live to serve and help people. And she's always done that. And she talks about how when people used to listen to the radio in the 80s, she would give them information on the storms or what was happening because there was no internet. I like the fact that if you're thinking about who is Gary Mullins and how can he help you, there is a world in which you can have a website that just says, I do more than one thing, and that's okay. If you're interested in high quality music for your events, click here. If you're a car geek and you want to chat about this stuff, click here, etc., etc. That's okay as a kind of look. Who are you, Gary? To be honest, mate, depends who's asking.
Yeah, that
But
is.
tax man. But who's asking? These are the things I'm interested in. I've built businesses in all of these areas. Join me. Ask me a question. Find out something. So turn every part of what you do into an action plan for that person. Book great live music in the UK for your special event as a
Mhm.
generic CTA that is still quite specific. Tell me about what you want to do in the car arena because I know you own cars and I know you attend events and I know you're in communities. What does that look like? Is that something that's happening or is that a plan for the future?
I'm always having ideas, right? I'm always thinking about opportunities and seeing like possible ways that I might be able to create value for the different people I come across. I run part of the Ferrari Owners Club that covers 3 counties in England, and my responsibilities there are to work with independent dealers, main dealers, and lots of other places of interest that the members of the club might find interesting to attend. So I have to organize those events. You mentioned the watches. We've got visits to watch factories in the UK and other designers and so on. And so there are a lot of people that could benefit from the network that I look after. I'm looking after a lot of people that have got high net worth, specific interests in a certain lifestyle, and it's highly concentrated and highly geographically concentrated as well. I've always been trying to think about how I can improve access to those people where it benefits everybody. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, which ties in really well with a podcast premise, is creating events and talking to high profile characters from within motorsport. And so it actually leads on to my next question, which is like, how would you recommend cultivating ideal prospective guests who don't necessarily have an immediate need of what I might be able to reciprocate with? So obviously I'm familiar in the book that you've got good, better, and best outcomes. And best is them employing me potentially. Better is me making a recommendation and joining the interviewee with somebody that in my network. If I don't have really, if they're not in a position where they need either of those things, how can I create a relationship? What would you do that would mean that I could still reasonably get those people in a room and potentially create. I quite like the idea of interviewing a famous racing driver, for example, in a room full of interested guests as well, like being that person that's interviewing that the luminary, creating something, an evening with, and that
Right.
potentially being a podcast in its own right. My concern is like how I get to the point where I can do that with credibility, with nothing really to offer.
Okay, so first of all, I love everything about this. Second of all, you have everything to offer. And there's a couple of things that I will pull directly from, I think, Seth Godin. Are you familiar with Seth Godin?
Yeah, and it's not personally, but yeah.
I know, Seth, one of the big boys. One of his phrases is, people like us do things like this.
Yeah.
So you've said to me, turns out people who drive nice cars also like nice watches. And let's replace the word nice with luxury, right? People who drive luxury cars probably like luxury watches. They also like other luxury stuff. And you sell what I can buy from you today are experiences that make things more memorable. And that is music. That is a live music solution, right? So that's how those markets link. So that's super cool. I don't know if this is Seth Godin, but I'm pretty sure that I heard him say it first. So I don't know who said this, but have you ever heard someone talk about no one buys a drill?
Yeah, I know that story, yeah.
Right. They buy a tool so they can get the hole in the wall. They don't want a hole in the wall. They want a space for the nail, blah, 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 blah. They want a picture. And then it ends with they want the feeling that the picture gives them. I'm sure that I could have said that more eloquently, but you know the story. So people don't buy a drill. They buy something that enables them to have the feeling that the picture that they can hang on the wall gives them, the short version. People don't buy a Ferrari. They buy the feeling that a Ferrari gives them. Because if they just wanted to get from A to B, whatever, right? So what I know about the luxury, and I've spent quite a lot of time because also when I used to run a band and just because of the environments I've been around, both as a musician and as someone in business, I've been around a lot of very wealthy people, right? And those people value their time. They know what their time is worth and they will spend money to create feelings and memorable experiences. And that is the common thread between you selling a band and you being a recognized, respected community member of the Ferrari Owners Club. I don't know what part of the book you've got to, but when I started that podcast years ago, we didn't start a podcast about a band. We started a podcast about events. And that meant that the events professionals wanted to speak to us. Other things happened that were good. But we also used that as a vehicle to say it was sponsored by our band. So you can do I don't know, I don't want to make it about men particularly. You could make it about men if you wanted to, but you could have a cool cars and cool stuff type podcast where you get to talk to people you love hanging around with about the geeky car stuff.
Yeah.
And it can be sponsored by your live music company. So every time someone listens, they understand they're talking to someone who knows their shit in the car space and in the watch space and in the kind of luxury lifestyle brand space, which you're really into. And you're putting your brand of, there's nothing worse than putting on a party with you put your watch on, you've parked your cars up, they're nice and clean in the front drive. You're playing a shitty Spotify playlist. Guess what? Right? That's probably the kind of positioning. If I was going to say start a podcast, that's probably how I would do it if I was you. Because you'd have loads of fun, genuinely, and that would come across and you'd make a connection. So the big things for you are who you're going to pick to have on, who you're going to invite, and what kind of conversations you need to have with them that is both valuable for the wider community and also will give you an asset that you can repurpose and do fun stuff with. Because that might end up being, okay, there's a podcast because that's the source content, it's a human conversation and all of that stuff. Are you already sending out a monthly newsletter?
Yeah, that goes out to the members.
So all of that stuff, and I don't know if there are additional political conversations you need to have because it's a larger Ferrari already branded and stuff, but I would look at Ferrari's people and say, I'm going to improve this. I'm going to produce a podcast on my own dime. And the way I'm going to do that is my music company is going to pay for it. So we're going to talk about joining the club and all of the things you can do, but also there'll always be an advert in it for when the engine stops because you've run out of fuel. The second best sound is live music, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
You can do it in cool ways that
Yeah.
appeal to them. And then a lot of the business is going to happen when you've pressed stop in what I call the post-coital pod moment. Like that's when the business is going to happen because they're going to go, that was amazing. Thanks for asking me all those questions. That was a really fun chat. And then your good, better, best is, okay, they might become a client. They might say, one of my daughters is getting married and my son's got an anniversary, and yeah, they might book 10 events with you. Like, great.
Mm.
Or they might be someone who isn't quite there, but runs an independent Ferrari dealership
Yeah.
and who might book you once a year, but who have they got access to? More people that will book what you sell. So that as an extension of growing the one thing, if the one thing is the music business, or it's about value to those experiences in a way that means people will pay for early access to be on a special Gary's special list, to the Watch Factory tours, what have you. I'm going to announce this stuff, but you guys are busy executives doing all really important things. You want to be the first to know. You're the kind of people that don't want to miss out. You're the kind of people that pay for first class because you like to get a good night's sleep on a transatlantic flight. If we know that about people, then we also know they like to be first in the queue for anything that you've got. So that's a positioning thing for you. But it's also fun. It's actually something that you're like, I'm like jazzed to do this because you can see it.
Yeah, I did have an idea that a podcast of entrepreneurs with cars, like that straddle both sort of business and luxury automobiles, would be an interesting premise for a podcast and provide me access to some of those kinds of networks. But it hadn't occurred to me at all that it would be appropriate for something as disparate as a music business to essentially be that lead sponsor, if you like, for that product. But I think it's clever. I can see the value of doing it, and it's quite exciting as a premise.
I've got some notes. I wrote down, I wonder what this episode is going to be called, right?
Yeah,
Oh, what would I call this episode? I was just as we were waiting to get on the call. And I wrote, how to make money mixing business with pleasure.
I like it.
Because I know that about you. I know that you're into that stuff. I also would look at the kind of not the dark side, but the side that gets a lot of shit around dudes with nice cars, right? People with flashy cars get abused, right? There's a lot of posing on the internet. There's a lot of people that hire cars and stand next to them and then put up an advert. There's all those people. And if you're that deep into an owners club, it's not just about the money. It's about the engineering and the skill and the artistry of making a beautiful machine or a beautiful watch. They're the things that you're interested in, if I've read you right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very different from some bro who's bought a neon colored Lambo, whatever. Like it's a different market. And I would imagine that the people that you hang around absolutely despise those people because they actually devalue the class. When I think about the kind of thing you're into, I also think about people who hang around with the Royals and those kind of like high end, but also just classy and not too flashy. Even though they're beautiful cars, they're beautiful watches, they're not necessarily in your face. They appreciate the details. I would
Mhm.
play on that massively. And I'd use the repellent part of the magnetic marketing to say, this is about people who love the art and the science of these machines, these cars, these watches, these luxury items, and find true pleasure and true joy in it, but aren't necessarily wearing Burberry tracksuits. I'm exaggerating. But like
Yeah.
telling people, I say this probably all the time as well, and I don't mind repeating it, talking about who you're not for and what you stand against in some ways
Yeah.
is so powerful to them. I think you can enter the conversation in the head of someone who's, I've just sold my company for £10 million, for example. If I've done that, I'm not in the super rich zone, but I'm in the I'm going to be absolutely fine zone, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also in the zone where I've got no mortgage and I can afford to buy one or maybe two, maybe a bit more, I don't know, like nice cars because I've always wanted a Ferrari, right?
Mhm.
Now I'm in a position where I can do that. But I actually want to spend time with it and I want to meet people that are into the same stuff and I want to be around people who have also had an exit at about the same value. So I'm also probably looking because I'm upwardly mobile and I've made an exit. I am probably in a weird kind of way looking to make new friends that I have something in common with rather than people I grew up with who I don't anymore for
Yeah.
whatever reason. That's not always going to be the case, but that's going to be one of the things that's happening. And making friends as a middle-aged person is weird. I was thinking about this this morning because a lot of my clients are in men's clubs and stuff, and they're cool. That's just a thing. Whereas in the UK, that's a bit odd. It's a bit of a non-thing. I was thinking about my kids because they're not into football, because I think that's the default men's club in the UK is
Mhm.
football. And if
Yeah.
you're not a football dude, what is it?
Yeah.
It's music, or you find your way, but also you can use that. Again, someone talks, when we talk about building communities, people will come for one thing because you've said anyone on this list or any of the people in my close community will get first access to when the next Watch Factory tour is exclusively for Ferrari owners clubs. Get it here. And they'll be like, I really want
Mhm.
to secure my space on the waiting list for that watch. I really want that day out. They'll have such a good time. If you do a good job, they'll stay for the community,
Yeah.
which is exactly the same as the conversation I had with Kira about women drum camps. As much as I hate to say these two words, your personal brand. Sounds like you quite, I also like this, by the way, like being a good guy to know. Gary, I'll sort you out. Like, I'm looking for a yellow version of a Testarossa or whatever. Who do I need to know?
Yeah.
Gary might be a good guy to start with. My daughter's getting married next week. Gary, also a good.
Yeah.
Think about those things and what they're saying. And when you onboard them, but this is what's so beautiful is you've already got the community, right?
Mm.
You get to say, guys, I'm stepping up a gear. I'm going to start a Ferrari owners podcast. I really want to get to know you a little bit more. Here's a Google form that
Mm.
says, why do you love Ferraris? What's the first Ferrari you bought? What's your dream Ferrari? Who's your favorite racing driver? What other luxury items do you enjoy? Is it a watch? What kind of watch is it? When were you born? Maybe they don't want to give their age, but between this age, so get that info, and then you can look, and you might. I don't know if you want to go that far in, but do you have children? Great. Are they grown up and married? Are they dating? All of those things give you a dashboard. There was a really famous used car salesman in America who literally grew his business. It's quite, again, a famous story that many people have told me. I don't know who it is, but just used to always send happy anniversary and happy birthday cards to all his clients because he just had that data point and he just sold cars all year round to everyone in those families.
That's powerful.
Really powerful when you think about if someone can afford a Ferrari, they're 100% in the market for making sure the live music is good.
Yeah.
You've always dreamed of having that event in that location. The dress is sorted, the suit, the tailoring is awesome. What are the other complementary suppliers around any event, any landmark event? Now let's secure the memories with the perfect soundtrack. Boom. How do you feel?
Buzzed, excited. I feel like I'm right at the start of my journey in lots of ways. From what you're saying, I can definitely appreciate some of the tools and assets I already have that can create value for people. I can definitely see how the invite to a podcast or a mailing list, a newsletter, can definitely create additional value for them. And those additional touches, like having those data points of anniversaries and birthdays, and can just give you reasons to reach out. One of my other questions was going to be about how you maintain relationships with prospective, but also past podcast guests. So that you've illustrated there, that's one of the things that you could easily do and remain in that sphere and be a constant at the top of people's minds for something.
So not worst case, like just a really good practice. A good practice is to say, after you've done the recording, thanks for being on the show. So post-coital pod moment. Hey, Gary, I don't want to blow my own trumpet or anything, but I think I'm a pretty well-connected guy. Who can I connect you with? What are you looking for right now? And you might say, do you know any good dentists? And I'll go, no. Oh, yeah, or whatever. Right. But if I do know a good dentist, be happy to make an intro. And that is a good, if you think about good, better, best, that's a good thing for me to do. Maybe
Mm.
you'll never become a client of mine, whatever. But if I'm the guy that introduced you to a dentist who saved your tooth, then you'll talk about me to people who want to start a podcast maybe for their business and are not sure how.
Mm.
That's how that goes. So the interesting thing also about a Ferrari owner is that I imagine many of them own businesses, and I
Yeah.
would want to talk to them about their business, and I'd want to put them on stage. We're going to talk for 10 minutes about your love of cars, and I want to say thank you. I want you to talk about your business to me because I want the rest of the community to know what it is you do and how you help your clients and what kind of results you get for your clients. If you do that, then you're networking them together, and it's all because of Gary. So that is super useful as well. I'm just an accountant, mate. You don't really want to talk. No, there's going to be some really good stories about mistakes people make when doing their tax that can avoid them paying too much to the revenue. What are the things that people miss? There's always good questions to ask people who are experts in anything if you're interested. And it stops you from being, let me tell you about the great 5 piece lineup we've got. No one cares. No one cares
Yeah.
if it's 5 or 6 piece. They just care about it being the coolest thing and the best thing and the highest
The feeling thing that you mentioned,
feeling thing. Yeah. So when it comes to Ferrari, literally one of those brands where it's, yeah, I know, I already know one thing about you, which is you like driving the best machines in the world. You love the feeling it gives you, and you've worked your ass off to get to a stage where you own one. So I also know these other things about you. Let's have a conversation about that. And then let's have a conversation about your business because I'd love everyone to know a bit more. Because when you get together on the watch tours and the factory tours, they're probably not talking about their tax business, talking about the tires on the thing,
yeah.
right? And the tread pattern because they're not at work. So by mixing that somewhere else and then just feeding it into the community, they're listening to each other's stories between meetups. You will get loads more bookings if you do that. There's
Yeah.
literally no question.
I could see how that would come to pass, certainly. Yeah, I've got a lot of work to do.
Here's the thing, you don't really have that much work to do because you've got a Zoom account and you can press record. There's
Mm.
a few things, but you can delegate a lot of the post production. I would just think about 10 people who you know who are cool, have got quirky businesses, who spin a good yarn. Just get them on and say, look, I want to try this thing. To put it out, it'd be a great value add for the people in the club. Great. So I wouldn't overthink it. I would just do it.
We've covered the third one that I had, which is what advice would you give someone looking to build a network of people with a view to gaining access to experiences rather than business opportunities in the short term? And what methods or approaches are you using outside of the podcast format to create value for and maintain relationships? So we've talked about that a little bit. One of the other things that I was going to ask about was what your advice is for someone that's creating a completely new business with no existing clients, where the target avatars are someone like musicians. In my case, they will be musicians, but the product I'm looking to sell is ultimately going to be subscription based. So yeah, I guess the real thing is like they're starting from a completely new slate. Does that change anything in your view?
I'd be super careful with it because you told me the target market. So obviously, if it's pre-launch or whatever, I'm not going to ask you any of this stuff on a call, but I would say to you this. Most musicians don't earn very much money. Musicians do not live in the world of people who drive Ferraris. They
Mm.
work for them, but they aren't them in most cases. What comes to mind is do you like them, which you do because you are one in some ways, where you are a musician for sure. But can they pay? Yeah, but how much can they pay? So what is actually sustainable,
Yeah,
right? So there's that. Is it worth the bother? Think about that clearly. What's the value that they get? Why is it different? All of the standard shit that any new business should be like. Why should a musician subscribe to what it is that you've got to offer? And I think there's some really great case studies of really good music-based subscription stuff working very well. But I've got a lot of questions. And I tell you right now, like I'm doing this because I love talking to musicians about business. And
mm,
I've found out that there's a few of us around and this creates great content for me, but you're not paying for it. And that's cool. That seems like a cool way to start a relationship. And when it comes to this episode, for me, maybe at some point down the line, we'll work together and you'll decide that you want to hire me to help you, right? Privately. Fine. But I don't, that's not even slightly the top of my mind. What's at
Mhm.
the top of my mind and why I'm doing this is it helps me prove to people I know what I'm talking about because it's a conversation with somebody who I consider to be a peer in a lot of ways. That's the position I like to have with clients. I don't like this kind of I work for you and like I don't. So
Mhm.
these are the kind of peer-to-peer conversations I have with clients, and that's how I like to position it. And I think you've got the same with the Ferrari thing. A great result might be that that accountant happens to own a Ferrari that you know is looking for someone to help him with his marketing and messaging, and he's trying to get into the 21st century with all this podcasting stuff. You'll go, you want to speak to my mate Toby? Like that's a really good result for me, and I know you're hooked up with people that can afford to
Mhm.
hire me for the rates that I charge. So when it comes to a new business, you still just have to qualify who else is doing it. And if it doesn't exist, are you an absolute genius or is there a very good reason why it doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Without talking about exactly what it is, because I'm not going to do that to you, I would speak to the person in the target market or a proportion of people in the target market, and I would say something along the lines of, what would it be worth to you if you could X?
Mm.
And what are musicians' most pressing needs? Well, it depends on where they are in their life. So if they're in their 20s, late teens, 20s, 30s, most of them are just still hustling. They want to make money. They want to travel. They want to have a good time. They want to get laid. Like they want to do all the things. Awesome. And then at some point, they get into a relationship. They might become a parent. And there are other constraints that have got nothing to do with music that mean what you have potentially might be more appealing than if they were early career, for
Mhm.
example.
Yeah.
Musician isn't good enough, and professional musician isn't good enough. It's like a professional musician who's also constrained by certain things.
Mhm.
And then think about who they are. Think about who you want to work with. Think about who you want as clients who won't piss you off. There's nothing worse, I'm sure, we can both agree, than dealing with could be the best player in the world. They're a nightmare to work with.
Yeah.
You don't know if they're going to turn up. They're not the kind of people you want. So, what are the other things they've got in common other than the technical skill of being a musician in your case? I'd look at that
Mhm.
and I'd be really careful when you do the maths on, okay, what does 10 clients, 100 clients look like in a subscription for me to actually start making money that is meaningful? I don't know how you think about what meaningful money is, but
Yeah.
I think about holidays. I think about, does this mean we can go on a really nice family holiday? Does this mean I can move house? It's not the money, it's what I can do with it. Does this mean we can upgrade to premium economy on that long haul flight? Or does this mean I can fly business? It's like, why am I doing this? So
Mhm.
I think the fastest path to actual revenue for you is probably to stay over on the other side of the conversation we had. And then if you see a real need for it and it also makes money, great, definitely do it. But actually, what's the time cost? And is it going to be as fun as going to car shows and watch factories with guys that are worth tens of millions of pounds that just love hanging out with you and helping you grow your business?
Yeah.
I think you
Mm.
and I are
Yeah.
able to have a conversation that crosses boundaries. I can think of hundreds of musicians that would listen to this and think, who the hell do these two guys think they are? What kind of wanker talks about luxury watches and being a musician in the same sentence? And the answer is people who like luxury watches and play music. And it's not my problem, guys.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I am aware of is that challenge of asking the question, what's practical, reasonable, and valuable for musicians specifically to pay for a subscription-based service. And also combined with that, like that's a field that I know really well. And I've got a lot of connections in that realm, a lot of experience. And I feel like that's probably my best avenue for creating that value in the short term. And I'm still quite green, I think, with the supercar space. And it's not to say that I couldn't overcome that. And obviously, I'm already creating value for a lot of people in that in a very specific area of the country, but I am trying to work out what the path is where I don't completely disregard something that I'm inherently familiar with. It's a new concept to me to use a supercar and entrepreneurship type podcast supported by my bands that I run as a
Yeah,
sponsor.
but the positioning is slightly more high end than that. It's your live music agency, which is true. That's not bullshit. Like you put out more than one band, so therefore
Yeah,
there's that, and that aligns much more with, oh, I run a band that plays the dog and duck every Thursday night. It's not what you're doing. Second of all, something else that you've just said that I would like to help you with. You just said you feel like you're green in the supercar space compared to music because that's your technical skill.
yep,
I think that's not a problem at all because the geekiest Ferrari engineers in this country, or some of them, I imagine, right?
yeah,
The people like, oh, when you use that oil, oh, that's where they've gone wrong. Those people, right? Oh, this kind of ball bearing. Anyway, whatever it is, those people exist. They are shitty communicators normally.
yep,
And your whole thing when it comes to podcasting, when it comes to leading a group, is not to be the expert,
yep,
not to be the expert. It's, you know, about the hero's journey as a concept. There's highs and lows, and this is how you win. That's the sort of arc of so many stories that have
mm,
been written. Apologies for the terrible articulation of that. But what you are as someone who leads a community is not the hero, you're the guide. So when you think about music, and I think about music, we can both, because we're both technicians, we can have a very geeky conversation about dotted eighth note feels, right? Or whatever it is. Like something that most people are like, what the that's an inside baseball conversation that we can have because we've done hours of practice and thousands of gigs, right? When you're selling live music to somebody, you're not talking about that stuff. You're
mm,
talking about moments, you're talking about what happens when you could say, I have found the best independent Ferrari dealer in the Southwest who keeps your cars running so that you get the feeling like you're the guide, you're someone they trust. And I think they like the fact that you're on the journey with the technical stuff. But the value is in curation, right? The value is not in, I know the five best musicians that make the super band ever, and no one cares. Like, you found the five best musicians who work well together to make your event memorable. That's what you're selling. No one gives a shit how good you are at playing the guitar, and no one gives a shit about how good I am at playing the drums. That's the gutting truth of it.
yeah,
Part of me being good on the drums isn't just me playing in time and playing some fills that make people feel happy. It's looking up and smiling, or it's arriving on time and it's not being an asshole to the rest of the band, and it's going along with it if the break's a bit shorter than you promised it would be, because that's also what part of being a drummer is, right? So I would absolutely not worry about, I'm not an expert yet.
okay,
Part of the podcast thing in this case is documenting a journey. Right
mhm,
now, here, these are the cars I've earned. I dream of owning these cars one day. I'm growing my business. And like, that's a lovely thing. People will want to help you.
mm,
People will want to be part of your story. If you guide them to this cool event, they will guide you to their friend who's got a massive end of year party for their private bank. Look, that's how that's going to work. So I'm like really excited that you've got that because I didn't know to what extent you had that. I just knew that you liked cars.
okay.
You owned a few, what have you. What's been most useful to you in the last hour?
I would say the revelation that I don't necessarily have to separate those two worlds and those two interests, and that actually there are lots of practical and meaningful ways that I can combine those two disparate interests. But I've made as many notes as I possibly can, and I'll definitely be watching back to bulk these out. But there's been so much that's been so valuable there. Yeah,
Oh, mate, thanks for doing it.
I'm really grateful.
I'll leave you with one last thing because it's really a strong feeling that I have around your target market and your community is that people who buy Ferraris, people that appreciate the finer things in life, like less noise and are willing to pay for it. So everything you do around taking them to an event or giving them a great experience with one of your bands can tie back to that central message. And you can talk about there's nothing more beautiful than the sound of a well-tuned car going down the road. And there's nothing more disgusting than an old banger with an exhaust with a hole in it, right? There's nothing more offensive to our discerning ears. And that is the same as you settling for DJ Double Decks Dave. And you know that because I invest in Ferraris too. So that's how you tie those things together.
Yeah. That was really useful. Yeah, I like the comparison. Thank you, Toby, so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, mate, pleasure, man.
It's been really valuable.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a 5-star review and share it with someone you think it would help. If you're a business owner considering podcasting or you're not getting the results you wanted from the podcast you have, I've got more episodes, a best-selling book, Narrow Podcasting, and Profitable Pod Method skills sessions, all designed to help you where you are right now. For all of that and how I can support your business, head over to narrowpodcasting.com.